guys, it's Kira, and today I'm going to be talking you through all of the books that are currently on my physical TBR because let's be honest, there are quite a lot of them. So today I'm just going to be focusing on the physical TBR because in the notes section on my phone I've got a TBR list of all the books I want to read, and it's absolutely huge, and because it's so long and it would take me forever to go through it all today, I'm just going to be focusing on the books that I actually currently own because there's just so many of them, and I found that recently I've been buying books way faster than I've actually been reading them, and so I'm trying to call myself out a little bit and admit to how many books I have sat on my shelf waiting to be read so that I can actually just finally get around to reading them and not buy any more books until I've actually read the ones that I currently own. So for the purposes of this video, I've just split all of the books that I've got on my TBR into three main categories. So we've got YA books, we've got classics, and we've got some adult books. And so without further ado, I'll get on with telling you all of the books that I still need to read. So first up are two books that I've owned for a really long time, and that is Will Grayson by John Green and David Levithan, and An Abundance of Catherines by John Green. So I owned these books when I was a lot younger, when I was reading things like The Fault in Our Stars and Paper Towns and those kinds of books, but I never ended up getting around to these, and as I got a little bit older I just didn't feel inclined to read John Green's books anymore. But last year I picked up Turtles All the Way Down and really enjoyed it, so I thought I might give these books a go in the near future. Next up are two screenplays, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them and The Crimes of Grindelwald. I find it really hard to find the motivation to read plays, but these are sat there on my Harry Potter shelf and I feel really bad for not having read them, so hopefully I'll get around to these ones soon. And next up is a book that BookTube absolutely loves, so I feel kind of out of the loop for not having read it yet, and I'm really excited to give it a go, and that is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. And next up I've got a book from an author that I absolutely love, and that is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys, a historical fiction set around World War II in Lithuania, which is a topic that I find so interesting, so I'm really excited to give this one a read. Next up is quite a new addition to my TBR, and that is Love and Other Carnivorous Plants by Florence Gonsalves, which is a book that follows a girl who's in recovery from an eating disorder, which is something that I've talked about quite a few times on this channel and is a topic that I'm really passionate about and super interested in, and I always love to read books about this topic because I think it's definitely underrepresented. So I'm really excited to give this book a read, and hopefully it lives up to my expectations. And next up we've got The Wicked Deep by Shay Earnshaw, which is a historical fiction that deals with the topic of witch trials, which is something that I find so interesting but have really struggled to find a good selection of books on, so I'm really excited to give this a read and see what it's all about. And then the final YA book on my physical TBR is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, which is again another really popular YA fantasy on BookTube, and I feel like I'm probably one of the only people on BookTube that haven't read this book yet, and I also feel like I'm definitely missing out by not having started this series because so many people seem to love it. So I'm really excited to read this book and the rest of the books in this series, but on account of this video being about getting through my current TBR and not buying so many new books, I'm definitely not letting myself buy the following books in this series until I've finished this one. So moving on to some classics, and believe me when I say there are a lot of classics on this TBR because I love classics and there are just so many to choose from, so I end up accumulating so many of them and just not having enough time to read them all. So the first one on my TBR is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy, which will have been the first Thomas Hardy book that I'll have picked up. And as you can probably tell from how tatty the cover of this book is, I've owned this one for quite a while but just haven't managed to get around to reading it, and I've just kept pushing it down my TBR and reading other things instead. So I'm hoping to get around to this one quite soon because I really would like to give it a read and see what it's all about. And next up is A Room with a View by Ian Forster, which I feel like I really need to read quite soon because my mum bought me this book for my birthday last year. My birthday's on the 21st of May, so it's quite quickly approaching to a year since I've owned this book, and I really feel like I'd at least like to read it before my birthday comes around again. And next up is Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, which I don't really know too much about, but the blurb of this book says it's meant to be quite scandalous, and I also love the Penguin English Library covers, so those two things combined were enough for me to pick it up, but I definitely want to actually get around to reading it soon. And next up is Watership Down by Richard Adams, which was definitely a cover purchase because, I mean, look at this book, it is beautiful, but I definitely want to read it because a book that's written from the perspective of rabbits sounds like a really interesting and unique concept, and one that I'm definitely intrigued to find out more about. So next up we've got The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, which I can't lie to you, I've actually got two copies of. The first is just a plain Penguin version, but this version is the Penguin Deluxe Classics one, and it was so beautiful that I had to buy it, but now that I've got two copies of the book, I really need to get my act together and actually get around to reading it. Next up we've got Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, which I can't lie, I've owned for quite a while now. This was actually the first Penguin Deluxe Classics cover that I picked up because it's just so beautiful, but it's looking like it's probably going to be one of the last ones I end up reading. But I read quite a few Austen books last year and I really enjoyed them, so I really would like to pick this one up soon because it's been a little while since I read one of Austen's books. Next up, we've got a big bind-up of the Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, which I can't lie, I'm not actually that excited to read because I've read some of the stories individually before and not been blown away by them, but I'm hoping that reading them as a complete series might make it easier to get into and make it an overall more enjoyable experience, so I am excited to see if that's actually the case and also just to have read all of them and see what they're all about. And next up we've got yet another Penguin Deluxe Classics edition, because if you hadn't noticed the pattern, I literally cannot seem to stop myself from buying these beautiful books, but this time we've got A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, which I'm really excited to read because in terms of James Joyce's works, I've only read his short story collection Dubliners, but I did really enjoy that, so I'm really excited to see what his actual full-length novels are like. Next up we've got a modern classic, and that is Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. So, slowly but surely, I am trying to make my way through the Vintage Russian Classics collection. So far I've read War and Peace and Anna Karenina, but there are still quite a few that I need to get through, and those books are Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, and finally, Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. So moving on to the adult fiction books on my TBR, the first 3 books are ones that I actually started whilst I was at university but just didn't have time to finish amongst all of the other readings that I had to do. So the first 2 are Nights at the Circus and The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, and There But For There by Ali Smith. And next up is And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini, which I'm so excited to read because he's the author of one of my other favourite books, A Thousand Splendid Suns, which is just incredible, so I'm really excited to see how this matches up to A Thousand Splendid Suns. Next up is a book that actually featured on one of my first ever booktube videos, which was a book haul, and that is I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes, which is yet another book that I was actually bought for my birthday last year, so I really need to get my act together and read it before it gets around to my birthday again this year. Next up is a book that I can't believe I haven't actually read yet, and that is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which just sounds so interesting. And next up we've got Pet Sematary by Stephen King, which I've literally just watched the new film version of, and the film was great and really interesting, and it sounded like such an interesting concept, but if The Shining is anything to go by, the book is going to have so much more depth and go into all of the interesting concepts from the film in so much more detail, so I'm really excited to give this one a read. And then we've got another Stephen King, this time it's Different Seasons, which is a collection of 4 short stories, including the books that the films Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me are based on. And those are 2 films that I absolutely love, so I'm really excited to read those short stories and also the other 2 in there because I'm sure they'll be interesting as well. And we've made it! The final book on my TBR is The Choice by Edith Eger, which is actually a memoir, so I think it's kind of a non-fiction, and it's basically her recollections of her time in Auschwitz during World War II, so it should be a really interesting and moving book, and I'm excited to give it a read. So there you have it, those are all the books on my physical TBR, and I'm now currently surrounded by piles of books, which is kind of daunting because it's making the fact that I have to read them all in the near future very real. But anyway, those are all of the books that I'm hopefully going to be reading and loving over the next few months. So hopefully you won't be seeing any book hauls from me in the near future, because I'm really going to try and dial back my book buying until I've managed to make my way through most of this TBR. Now I wouldn't quite like to say that I'm not going to buy any books, because we all know I'm probably not going to be able to stick to that, but I am going to try and make sure that I'm only buying books that I really want to read until I've made my way through most or all of this TBR, because I really can't keep buying books until I've read the ones that I already own. But if you happen to have read any of the books on my TBR, please let me know what you think of them, because I've got so many books, I don't know in which order to read them, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if there's any that you think I really need to read or are really great books, let me know because I'll put them towards the top of my TBR pile. So yeah, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.